Hey everybody, it is Mike Schumann and Seth Tao here for another edition of the East 17th Street podcast, a podcast by the Daily Hoosier. And we are back to continue our series on the previewing the Indiana football 2025 season. And today we're going to look at, again, one opponent and one IU position group. We're going to look at Illinois, a high magnitude week 4 game, and the Indiana running back room. And Seth, starting with Illinois, like I said, very high profile opener for both teams in the Big Ten. It's hard to imagine a bigger game to start Big Ten play because these feel like the two teams that only one of them is going to make the college football playoff. If either, obviously neither could make it. They're inconceivably both, but sitting here right now with only knowing what we know, it feels like only one of these teams is going to make it. And since they play each other, this game is probably going to go a long way in deciding that.
Absolutely. And, whether or not either of them makes it, it's going to go a long way to determining who's in the race and who's in the mix for it as the season goes on. I don't know that you'd call this an elimination game per se, because
Right.
it's sports and anything can happen. And people expected Indiana to fall off last year way earlier than they did, obviously. So I wouldn't call it an elimination game or outright say there's 0% chance that both could get into the playoffs, but it's a big early season game for both teams for sure.
And right now, Illinois is the higher ranked team in both the coaches poll and the AP poll. I'm referencing coaches poll because I didn't focus on where Illinois was in the AP. Maybe you did, but coaches poll, Illinois is number 12 and Indiana is number 19. I know Indiana's 20 in the AP. I suspect Illinois is right around that same 12th spot for the AP. And I guess the first thing that I'm thinking about that is, man, do I agree with that? Like, do I really, in my gut, believe that Illinois should be regarded as a better team than Indiana going into the season based on what we know? My gut says no. What does your gut say?
My first reaction to these things is always it only matters so much.
Right.
Especially
Right.
when you have these two teams set to meet in week 4, where the numbers next to their names for now does not matter all that much. And Illinois actually has, Indiana, has a pretty soft, without getting into the scheduling debate, it's a pretty soft non-conference schedule.
Right.
Illinois actually has a tricky game in non-conference against Duke. I mean,
Yes.
that's a game that is not a guarantee. That Duke could absolutely win that game against Illinois. So that's, they're going to have been tested already. So it's not that may be for most people, okay, now we're going to really see how this Indiana team looks against, a real tough team. But Illinois may already have that kind of battle testedness in them. But to get back to the original question, I mean, I think I generally would agree that I guess if I was making my own rankings, I think I'd have Indiana ahead of Illinois, but I don't think it's so I don't think it's so egregious that I would sit here hands on head screaming, "What are you doing?" across the country. It's there's probably cases that could be made.
Yeah, I'm with you 100% on that. When I see preseason polls that differ from my expectations, it just makes me stop and think, okay, what are these guys thinking that I'm missing? And I guess that's our job right here in the next 10 or 15 minutes or so when we're talking about Illinois, is kind of breaking down, why people are high on them, perhaps why we're not as high, at least why I'm not as high. I think that the two headline things with Illinois for me are that they return a solid quarterback, and return is the key word because I think their overall returning production is among the best throughout all of college football. I think that's what's compelling people the most.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got my preview that I wrote earlier in the summer on Illinois just up here right now on the Daily Hoosier site if you missed it. But I mean, you're right that they returned, they have the 6th most returning production on offense of any team in college football in the country. That's, Bill Connolly, ESPN's numbers, who always pulls those in the after spring ball, preseason, good stuff. And then defensive returning production, they've 72%, which is 11th in the country. And, to have that amount of returning production on both sides of the ball, I mean, you hear it probably said a little bit more frequently in college basketball in terms of, you stay old, you bring in talent, you get old, you stay old. Like the old teams win in college basketball and the teams that stay together. You always hear so much about that in college basketball, but I mean, it's true in every sport. In college football, right, too. You keep teams together and you have that continuity. In this era where there's so much turnover, to have that a level of continuity, that, I mean, you can't discount that.
Yeah, and I think it indicates something beyond just the fact that they have their core back. To me, it indicates they have a good culture. They have a place where people want to come back to, as you alluded to right there, in an era where players have the ultimate flexibility. And I can't imagine that Illinois is, one of the top NIL programs, although revenue sharing does balance the playing field a little bit. The fact that players are coming back to Illinois is compelling to me.
And people aren't exactly lining up to go vacation in sunny Champaign, Illinois.
No, it's definitely, in my opinion, one of the ugliest campuses that I've seen. I always love the hog farm that's like a block away from their basketball arena, which is, I think, the football arena or stadium's right next door. So I've never been one to be overly impressed with the Illinois campus.
I've only been there, I think, once. I actually thought Champaign was a nice little town, but
the town itself.
I didn't mean to dump all over Champaign with that little joke. Just, if you don't have the NIL and there's no appeal, like, South Beach or something like that, the nice weather, something else, you're doing something else right to get people in the building and keep them there.
Yeah, no, I guess I was trying to dump on them. Just I took the opportunity that you gave me there. I just always crack up when I drive there for basketball games. I'm sure they go out of their way to make sure recruits do not drive into the stadium the same way that I do, because you would not be impressed at all if you did. But again, strong across the board returners. I guess the question is, returning doesn't always mean everything. Like, if you're returning guys from a mediocre team, chances are you're going to be mediocre the next year. So I guess the question is, how good is this team? Obviously, they were 10-3 last year, which suggests they were very strong. But if you really start to pull back the details of how they did last year, it's not nearly as impressive, I would say, as what Indiana did. From the standpoint of, they're not an explosive offense. They had a lot of close games. The headliner is Purdue. Like, they played a home game at Purdue, gave up 49 points to Purdue. Some of that was in overtime, but the fact that they went to overtime against Purdue, team Indiana beat a few weeks later, 66-0. Really, like, that's the one you circle and think, how good can we really consider Illinois if they squeaked by against Purdue at home?
Yeah, that's kind of the questions that I'm asking a little bit too. And it's almost impressive. You say it's not as impressive as what Indiana did. It's almost impressive, but in a different way. The fact that Illinois was able to get to, they had a 9-3 regular season and then capped it off with a bowl game win. The fact that they were able to have that season with kind of being right in the middle of the pack in just about everything. It's kind of impressive in another way that you were able to, pull it out that way, because they were 92nd in the country in total offense last year. And they were, what is it here? They were 68th in the country in total defense. And typically under Brett Bielema at Illinois' defense has been really good. And that was one of the lower, finishes they've had in total defense under Brett Bielema. So, they weren't kind of, they were pretty solid to mediocre in a lot of areas. It can help you win some ball games if you're just kind of competent in almost everything and not out, don't have maybe you have some minor weaknesses, but no major glaring game losing weaknesses type of deal. You're going to have to, you can find ways to scrap things out. And that might be not giving them the credit they deserve for how, they got up to 10 wins. And I guess, the point to be made there is that speaks to good coaching. If you have that level of, you get up to 9-10 wins, without really dominate, without being statistically dominant in any way. I mean, it speaks to good coaching to be able to kind of pull out some of those games. But you're right. That's the question to kind of ask is, yeah, they have a lot returning and, continuity is huge, but take a look at what the pieces actually are that are returning. And, you could maybe form some different opinions.
Yeah, I'm looking at some of the other overlap games from last year at Nebraska, another overtime game for them. And Indiana obviously destroyed Nebraska as well.
I think that game was before Indiana played Nebraska. I think that was pretty early in the season, if I recall.
Yeah, it was week 4 for them. It was their Big Ten opener last year. I mean, at the time, everybody thought that was a really impressive win for Illinois, but in retrospect,
Nebraska was ranked at the time, I think.
Yeah, 22 is what I'm looking at right here. They're two. They lost to Minnesota at home, which I think is another indicator of maybe they're not as good as we think they are. Although Minnesota was respectable last year, I'm not suggesting anything there, but there are 2 other losses at Penn State and at Oregon. Coincidentally, 2 road games for Indiana this year. But you look at those scores. Looks like it would be a combined 59-16. They lost those 2 games. Again, it shows a very limited ability to score. Obviously those are 2 tough road venues. Indiana didn't do too hot in their 2 toughest tests of last year. Anything you take away from those games or anything else about their schedule from last year?
I don't know. I think you can only last year's individual schedule. I think you may get down a bit of a rabbit hole if you're going, kind of deep diving into individual games and score lines and things like that. Because I mean, how sports work. Like it could be not saying that 59-3 or something like that kind of game can be anything but a butt whooping. But how sports work. That a game could be. Indiana could be trailing Penn State by, could be hanging with Penn State all game, be down by 7 with 3 minutes to go. Penn State kicks a field goal to go up by 10 and then gets a pick 6 on one mistake. And then all of a sudden it's a 17-point game and, everything's just different. So, overreacting to just scores and things like that is a little. Sorry, I was just getting a random call. Is everything still sounding normal?
Yes.
Okay, just making sure. I'll turn on Do Not Disturb, evidently. But, I don't want to overreact to like the individual schedule or anything. To me, it's more about, some of the pieces that they did lose are significant from last year's roster. And, like their leading receiver and their leading rusher both left.
Yeah.
And, they just some of the pieces that they actually lost. And it's just more about like, the roster they have coming back, more so than individual scores or anything like that. Because I mean, football can be very random. If you played a game over 10 times, you're going to see 10 different final scores.
Sure. So you mentioned that Duke game that Illinois has to play in week 2. I find that interesting because, while Indiana can kind of keep things under wraps and comfortably win their first 3 games, Illinois might have to show a little bit more to try to make sure that they win that game. And I think that could be a little bit advantageous to Indiana as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if nothing else, just that it's going to have to put more on tape for Indiana, because it's just not a game, Indiana against Indiana State is going to be able to have the 2s in by halftime. And Illinois, I don't know if that's the same week or whatever, but, Duke is a tough team. I mean, I think quarterback Malik Murphy is pretty good on Duke, and I think they played last year, and it may have been a close game as well. And I mean, that's just that's not a gimme by any means. And for all the hype about Illinois that you hear coming from a bunch of different circles, I mean, that's and I feel like a lot the game against Indiana is going to be getting a lot more hype than the game against Duke, and for obvious reasons. Big Ten opener and. Head to head in the Big Ten. Some people think it might be a rivalry versus a game against. I think Duke was a bowl team last year. I mean, don't sleep on Duke there. That that is going to be telling in some aspect. Just if Illinois, you may not know for sure if Illinois is as. Maybe the way to put it is you may not for sure learn if Illinois is as good as people seem to think they are that game, but you might be able to learn if they are definitively worse than people think they are.
True, true. I know you're one to keep up with point spreads. Have you seen one for this game yet?
For
And
Indiana, Illinois.
yeah, and while you look that up, I'll say, the fact that Illinois is ranked higher than Indiana right now, and Signetti often references, playing with a chip on their shoulder. I think that's probably going to play into his build up to that game, that people don't respect Indiana, that they're putting a team like Illinois ranked higher than Indiana. But I want to know the point spread, if there is one, because I think that's a good pressure test of, do we think Illinois is good because of the factors we've said, and because maybe they have a little bit easier schedule this year, versus do we really think they can beat Indiana at Indiana in week 4?
Yeah, well, I'll give you 2 point spreads here. Illinois for that Duke game, that's at Duke. Illinois is a 3.5 point favorite on the road. That's FanDuel has that at 3.5. I saw it on DraftKings for the Indiana game, and Indiana's a 3 point favorite currently over Illinois.
Okay, so that would roughly indicate that they think they're pretty equal teams, and it's the home field that's giving IU the edge.
Right.
Okay. All right. Anything else fans should know about Illinois before we flip over to the IU running back room?
I think they do have a good amount. Like, again, the returning players aspect is good. I think they have 6 returning starters on defense, and they added some key transfers on defense as well. It's the offense to me that I think is really, because I feel like I can trust Illinois to I feel like I can trust Illinois to kind of keep a steady defense. To me, it's the offense that's really interesting. I think Luke Altmaier is getting a lot of love, is one of the better returning quarterbacks in the Big Ten, and I feel like I might need to see a little more to kind of back that up, more than just he has experience and he's been there. And I mean, the numbers are pretty solid, I think, but I think I feel like I need to see a little more out of him. And the number 2 running back that's stepping into the main role this year, I mean, he averaged over 6 yards a carry. So, I wouldn't be concerned necessarily about them losing their starting running back, but they lost their 2 leading receivers. They have a transfer coming in from West Virginia, but excluding that one transfer, like everybody else that they have coming back in the receiving core finished under 300 yards receiving last year. So the pass game to me is really kind of interesting, because if some of those other younger receivers can't kind of step up and take their games to a next level, like their ceiling could be limited.
Yeah. I think, when I was reading about Illinois, I think they think their offensive line is a real strength of the team. I think everybody's back up front, and they feel like they have some pros up front. And to your point, I think receiver is a real question. Kind of a hidden talent of Altmaier too is his legs. Like he's a dual threat. On film, his speed pops a little bit, so that'll probably cause Indiana to play a lot of zone defense just to keep contain on him. But we'll do our predictions on a full episode where we go game by game. But I will say
the last thing I'd say on Illinois is that if they live up to their potential this season and meet that level of hype, or even if they fall maybe a level short of that but still have a good season, to me it's all coaching with them. It's it's how much can Bielema get out of his team every year, and he's one of the best coaches in the Big Ten for a reason, and he's going to have his team ready to go.
Yep. For sure. I mean, that game is sold out already. It's going to be a crazy scene. We'll see if Illinois gets through the Duke game and they're both undefeated. It'll probably be both teams top 15, probably pushing top 10 if there's some ranked teams knocked off before that. So there could be some, national appeal in that game. Certainly will be no matter what, but definitely the game everybody's got circled, at least in the first third of the season. let's pivot over to the running back room for Indiana. It's interesting because there's only like one of the three-headed monster from last year back, but it feels like it's very much a strength of the team, just like it was last year. It doesn't seem like there's going to be any big step back in running backs this year. You got Justice Ellison is gone. Tyson Lawton is gone. Ellison technically not gone because he's back as a coach with the team. I don't remember his exact title to you. I don't know if he's a graduate assistant or.
I think he's a graduate assistant, but
Yeah.
don't quote me on that.
Yeah, he's definitely around. We see him at fall camp. A lot of energy. Fun to watch him engage with guys he was on the team with last year. But those guys are gone. Kalen Black is back and looking as big and freakish as ever. A member of the Athletics all freak list for his weight room proficiency. Just a very impressive guy. I think I can't remember in what context I said this, but looks like the last guy on the team you'd want to try to have to tackle just because of his low center of gravity and just his mass as a player. So it'll be interesting to see. Like I think over the course of last year, he kind of fell to third in the rotation. Might have been fueled a little bit by a fumble he had in a game. Was that Maryland? Maybe I'm not sure, but he's clearly in the mix. I think there's clearly a three running back rotation. The other two guys are Roman Hemby, transfer from Maryland, and Lee Beebe Jr., transfer from UAB. I feel like Hemby's going to get the chance to really, shine, get kind of how Justice Ellison kind of became the quote unquote number one in the trio last year. I think Hemby's going to start the season in that role. What do you think?
I could see that. I mean, as far as last season, to call it a three-headed monster honestly feels a little ingenuous. Like it was even before said fumble, it was pretty much, it was a two-headed attack for pretty much from game one. We all left fall camp assuming and figuring that it was going to be, myself included. We all figured that it was going to be a three-headed committee. And Kalen Black was just never really much of a part of it. If I recall, I think he got banged up in the season opener against FIU last year, and I think maybe that at least led to the uncertainty. We could definitively say, oh, he's just not getting carries because he's hurt. Like, it wasn't that he was losing playing time; it's that he was, injured for the beginning of that game, and it didn't become, I guess, more clear until a couple games later that it was kind of just Ellison and Tyson Lawton. But I mean, after that, he had 5 carries against Western Illinois, 5 against UCLA, 7 against Charlotte, and then 3 against Maryland. It's like that's not like the workload of a guy that I would say was in the rotation. I think he was more, he would come in for a spell here or there and, maybe give a guy a blow. But I mean, you would see often last season, it would be, Lawton would be out there for a full drive, a full series, and then, Ellison or vice versa. It wouldn't be a true, back and forth 1A, 1B, 1A, 1B rotation. But I mean, it was pretty much, those guys would be out there for extended periods. You never really saw that with Kalen Black last year. He wasn't part of that rotation for the most part. He was kind of more the depth, and he is ready to step into that role. It seems like, a much bigger role. And for all the talk of the freaks, stuff and just the numbers you see, I mean, when you just look at that guy, he looks it like he is a big dude. I mean, he is going to really, he is going to, I think he's going to punish some defenders this season. You're right, though. I think Kalen, if not to typecast or pigeonhole anybody, but it's pretty easy to see Kalen kind of fitting into the Tyson Lawton role and Roman Hemby fitting into the Justice Ellison role. It's pretty easy to see that. It's going to be more. The question to me is, where does Lee Beebe fit into this picture? But I do think Indiana is definitely poised to have another strong year in the ground game.
Yeah, and I think Signetti addressed this Monday in his presser, so we can talk about it. That BB's been out for fall camp the first 2 weeks, really, just returned this week. So that probably puts him a little bit behind. Although there's plenty of time. There's a couple weeks of fall camp and some tune-up games before we really even have to worry about who's really got what role. Hemby's speed really stands out to me, and I don't think that's a surprise to anybody. They saw him run up and down the field against Indiana last year. If they didn't watch Maryland football, he was a real standout against IU. Um, but and he's also pretty good in the pass game. So I think he's gonna be a guy that Fernando's gonna look for a lot for check downs and with Black, as you said, I'll concede your point that he wasn't in the rotation the way the other two guys were, but he was always like, to me, if you're giving the guy a ball in an important game, they are in the rotation. But he was clearly third tier, so it's a semantics game. But with him still working his way back from that status last year, and BB kind of working his way back from his injury, it just seems like Hemby's going to be the guy. And it seems like, you watch the Big Ten Network's reports, they seem really impressed by him. Everybody seems impressed by Hemby.
Yeah, well, not to belabor the point about Kalon last year, but do you want to guess how many carries he had combined between the Michigan game, Ohio State game, and Notre Dame game?
Now, those might be zero.
A combined zero between those three games.
Yeah. I clearly remember his role just diminished over the course of the season. And I feel like there was a fumble in there that kind of was like the turning point, where if it was a 300 monster early on, there was a fumble in there that I felt like Cignetti, used that as his turning point.
Yeah, but anyway, I do really like Hemby. I think that's, when I saw they landed Hemby in the transfer portal this offseason, I was impressed. I think that was one of the bigger guys they got out of the portal this offseason. I think I really like, even back in Maryland, I really liked Roman Hemby. I think he's a really well-rounded running back, or a guy that can kind of do a little bit of everything. I think he's a guy, you mentioned his speed. I think his speed does pop. I think he may not bowl over people, with frequency, but I think he's a guy who can deliver a blow. And, he may not be as like big physically imposing, or at least, may not show it the way that Kalon Black does. But I mean, Hemby's not a small dude either. They're built pretty similar. They're built pretty similarly. So he can kind of lay out a defender or two as well. And I recall several occasions where Hemby has pretty good balance. Like, I think he can deliver that blow and, put a defender on the ground and kind of keep his balance and keep going and not go to the ground. I think that's one of his strong attributes. And he's got good hands. I think he's a guy that is going to be really important for Indiana's offense this year.
I think it was kind of a statement transfer too, because, he's a Maryland guy, like born and raised in Maryland, and played for Maryland. To make a cross conference transfer like that to a team they play again this year, like that, he clearly saw something kind of across the field, so to speak, with Indiana, and saw something with the staff that, he's a guy that with the NFL aspirations that, wants to use his last season of eligibility in the best way possible. So I feel like that was a major statement to get him.
Yeah, and absolutely. And on the other side, I mean, you have so many guys that you bring in from the transfer portal, whether it's just, a West Coast school guy or, a group of five school guy. And you kind of wonder just, how are they going to adjust to Indiana? How are they going to adjust to, the Big Ten? How are they going to adjust to, maybe this higher level of football than what they were at before? Hemby's a guy you don't really have to ask that about, because he's proven it at Maryland. 38 career starts at Maryland. He's proven it, and he's within the Big Ten year in, year out. So, I mean, that's as reliable of a transfer as you could really pick up.
Yeah, and I don't want to skip over the other guys in the room. I thought it was interesting on Monday. Cignetti mentioned Solomon Van Horst. He's a guy that just completely flies under the radar. I think this is his 8th year in college football, if I'm not mistaken, which is just crazy. As we're recording this on Tuesday afternoon, I think Lewis Moore's battling for his 7th year in college football. And I think I saw, just to update, I think there was a temporary injunction granted for Moore's behalf in that. So I need to, when we stop recording here, we'll get the details out. But but for Van Horst,
live, folks.
Yeah, we are recording live, and I said Wednesday afternoon. My head's still spinning from Puerto Rico. I'm trying to catch up with.
He's still on island time.
Yeah, there we go. But Do you think there's anything to Signetti mentioning him other than just maybe he had a good scrimmage? Do you think he has a role on this team this year?
He has a role in this team, and that role is kick returner. I
Yeah.
mean, Signetti has said stuff like that before about guys who aren't going to really do much of anything. And look, maybe it provides some glimpse into, maybe this year Van Horst is kind of the number 4. Maybe even so, I still feel like Kobe Martin would kind of be the number, the real de facto number 4 if
Yeah.
something was to happen, if they were to have kind of a disaster scenario where they lost a few, or, kind of in the Elijah Green sort of role, late in those games to provide that last kind of punch. Like I still would probably favor Kobe Martin over Van Horst in that role. But obviously, I mean, Van Horst, didn't have to really do much on kick returns last year, but he's been with Signetti for a long time, and he had more playing time and saw the field more at JMU earlier on, I think, before they made the jump to FBS. Like,
Yeah.
I think Van Horst may have been a starting running back when they were still in FCS at one point. So at one point or another, he had Solomon Van Horst in that role. So, that level of trust is there somewhere. But no, I'm not reading very much into Signetti mentioning him.
Okay. All right. Yeah, it's just interesting. Like I almost feel like Signetti's been with him for so long that there's,
I
he's
think Ollie's
probably
trying to
like,
say hi.
I'm not even looking at the camera right now. Where's my guy Ollie? All right, I see him wagging his tail too. He heard his name mentioned. um, yeah, I mean, I don't. Van Horst is probably, I don't know what his plans are afterwards. I'm sure being with Signetti for 8 years means they're pretty connected, and Signetti's probably just wants to mention his guy would be part of my guess there. You mentioned Kobe Martin. He's the only Indiana-based running back in the rotation. He's a redshirt freshman this year. The coaches and players have been asked about him, and everything seems to be positive. Of course, they're not going to say anything negative about the guy, but um, you said 4th in the rotation. That sounds right to me. But a lot can play out over the course of the season, so we'll see how that plays out. Have you watched him at all in fall camp to form any opinions on him?
I mean, I've watched some of the running back drills, which is most of what we get to see. We're out there for drills, not like scrimmage action or anything. And I mean, so you have to take that with many grains of salt, because that's 2% of the of the whole ordeal and everything. But I mean, at least from the teeny bit I've seen, I think he looks like he's got potential. He's another kind of real big dude. Without knowing the numbers off the top of my head, he actually, I've got it right in front of me. He I guess is a little bit smaller than Hemby and BB, or he's a little bit smaller than BB. BB is like 6'2". Kobe Martin and Roman Hemby are 6 foot, and Kalon Black is 5'10", but same, similar weight. Kobe Martin is built pretty similarly to all of those guys they already have in the room. So, big guy, can kind of punish defenders seemingly, but like we said, also he's really unproven, untested at this level. So while he may look the part and have the physicality in practice, it's another thing to be able to execute that in the game. And I mean, in Elijah Green in the 4th role last year, he came in with some more seasoning and experience than Kobe Martin is going to have in that 4 role. So I am kind of curious to see what level of trust they would have in him.
Yeah, I immediately laughed when you mentioned Elijah Green, because it just seemed like every time he would come in that 4th role late in games, like he would almost immediately score every time.
He was a big reason why they were able to, turn so many of those games from like
Yes.
30-10 to 45-10 or something like that. He would tack on a few extra scores late in a bunch of those games.
They had an embarrassment of riches in the running back room last year for sure. I'm looking at their roster right now. That they list BB at the same height as Kalen Black. I would not have guessed that. They say they're both 5'10", and actually BB weighs.
The roster must have been roster must have been updated since I wrote that whatever about those running backs. Then that is something doesn't seem right with that. But
Yeah. And also, like, I would have guessed Himby was taller than 6 foot. Like, he just looks like a really tall running back to me. But they say he's 6 foot 210. Actually, BB is the heaviest of the backs at 5'10 and 218. And a lot of that's in his legs. He has really strong, powerful legs, can break a lot of tackles. We saw some of that in the spring game last year. The guy we're not mentioning yet, true freshman Sean Quono, probably going to be a development year for him, but he was a pretty highly regarded recruit. I think he was a 4-star according to at least one outlet at one point, maybe more. So don't want to completely skip over him.
Never say never. I mean, obviously Signetti has shown that, if he feels like a freshman is, ready to help them right away, he's not afraid to throw them into the fire a little bit. But I mean, with as much other experience and other options they have in the backfield, it would be surprising if he's playing. It would be surprising if he's playing a big role, and it would be telling if he was playing a role either positively or negatively, depending on your perspective on life.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, those are the guys in the room. I think the peripheral things that impact running backs, like good quarterback play. I think Indiana is clearly expected to have that. Good offensive line play. I think I've heard Signetti say on multiple occasions he expects the line to be better than last year. So I can't see any reason why the running backs aren't going to be a very impactful group, just like they were last year. Perhaps even better if Himby can really become that game breaker that I think he has the potential to be.
Yeah, the offensive line play with the running game is just something to watch, because Trey Wedig was the team's best run blocker last season by far. No one that was on the roster, no one that they brought in as a transfer was even really close to what he was able to do in terms of run blocking. So they're just going to need some other guys to up their game in the run blocking for these running backs to really meet their potential.
Yeah, fair point. And point I think we can wrap up on. Like I've said before, I think we're going to try to keep these to kind of 30-minute bite-sized podcasts where we just kind of give you our thoughts on the key aspects going into the season. And in a couple weeks or less, we'll do the kind of a full run through the schedule and give you our predictions, which were way off last year. So look forward to that.
Grains of salt, people.
With that, I think we'll wrap it up right here. He is Seth Tao. I am Mike Schumann, and this is the East 17th Street Podcast. We'll talk to you all next time.